And welcome to the Beyond the Dollar Signs podcast with your host, Mark Taylan. Mark, how are you?
Hi, Bill. It's great to see you again.
It's great to see you. I am intrigued about today's topic because this is something, candidly, I was not familiar with, and I was reading over our notes, and this is a really fascinating tool, I think, potentially for some clients, some of your clients. So please, without further ado, tell us about ADUs or auxiliary dwelling units, if you would, please.
Yeah, I thought I would, in the past, we've talked a lot about, retirement planning and different ways people can finance the cost of care. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today was real estate, and they're called accessory dwelling units. And most people, when they think of dwelling units, they think about granny units, right? That secondary house that typically will sit on a lot. And so, I'm in the Bay Area. It's very common these days for people to put these ADUs on their property. And the cities are there's such a housing shortage that the cities offer, sometimes incentives to put that accessory dwelling unit on the property.
Oh, nice.
And what I find fascinating is that all the different things that ADU can represent for the family in regards to generational planning, as well as financial and retirement planning. So today I really wanted to kind of dig in and talk a little bit about some of the things, the ways that these ADUs, we'll call them ADUs, are being used today for clients and others that I know to really help address certain needs.
Yeah, no, it is interesting. And, I spent a number of years covering business and financial news. So obviously my first thought when I looked at it is it's an interesting alternative investment.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's a way to invest your money in real estate that has nothing to do with buying another piece of property or buying some more stocks or wondering about what the bond market is going to do. But you've got some really good things in terms of advantages it creates and impact that it can have. So let's start with, your number one thing here is it can create some retirement income. That's obvious, but also really necessary for a lot of people.
Yeah, I have some real life stories to share.
Yeah, well, you
real
can
life
tell them
stories to share, right?
There you go.
So oftentimes, when somebody's planning for retirement, the biggest asset is the real estate. It tends to be that realist piece of property, right, that they've lived in. And so often people are thinking, well, maybe this house is too big. I'm going to resize or downsize into something more manageable for me at this time. And then the other thing is that maybe if you're downsizing, you assume that you're going to have additional income from that, additional proceeds left over that you can generate income. That tends to be the train of thought that I see a lot of people go down. But another thought is that what about maximizing the real estate that you have? And one of the things that you can do is you can potentially put an ADU in the backyard. If you've got a lot that's big enough, normally the cities will allow you would be amazed. You probably have to, I think there's a 3 to 5 foot limit from the fence that the ADU has to be away from. I guess I forget what the name of that is. But there's
it's an easement of some type,
like an easement of something of that sort. But you'd be amazed what a 400 square foot ADU would most likely fit in people's backyards. And the ADU, surprisingly, 400 feet doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually a bed. It could be a bedroom, a kitchen, a bathroom. I mean, it's actually quite a good sized living space.
Right.
And I've seen,
especially if you're talking about, one or two people.
Absolutely. And these ADUs can run anywhere from 400 square feet to I've seen them up to 1,200 square feet. So they can be really small and compact, and they can be very large. And so it's a fascinating idea because if you have an ADU in the backyard, what do you do with it, right? So from a retiree standpoint, I think they have two options, and I've seen this. One of the options is You rent out your primary residence in the front and you live in the back in the ADU, right?
Oh,
Because number one, you'll be able to collect a lot more rent if you rent out the primary space because it's
yeah.
bigger, pathetically, right? And maybe you don't need as much space anymore. So that's fascinating. I've seen that happen, a real life scenario where a client went in and said, you know, I want to build an ADU. I figured out with an architect and what it's going to cost me. And they figure out the numbers and they build that ADU and said, well, if I build it, it's going to cost me this much money. But if I rent out my front house, it's going to rent for $5,000 a month, right? It more than covers the financing costs of the ADU and it generates income for them. So very
That's
fascinating, right? It's
great.
like they've,
No, that is really good. Yeah.
and whether they choose to use the ADU as the primary or their primary residence as the primary, it really depends on cash flow and what their needs are, right? If you want a little bit more income, move to the back. If not, you stay in the front and rent out the back. So I find that from a retirement planning standpoint, it's another tool that clients don't really think they can do, right? And so
Yeah.
pretty fascinating way to look at income in retirement.
Well, one of the things that I find fascinating about it is that, a lot of people, and you just referenced it, is as they get older and they retire, they think, well, maybe we want to downsize. We don't need to live in this 3-bedroom house, 2-bedroom house anymore. We need we've been much better off in something smaller, more manageable. And, wow, it seems like a potentially perfect solution for families who are going through this with a parent, who's like, I don't really want to move, but I don't need this much space.
Yeah. And you brought up something you kind of were alluding to that. What about this multi-generational, right, thing that's
Yep.
happening with aging parents? A lot of times, as we all get older, there's that trend, right? We're starting to take care of our parents and think about what's the next stage for them. And so one of the possible scenarios is you build the ADU for mom and dad, right? And they
Right.
come and live right next to you. You're right there. What does that do? I think it does a couple things. It gives them their own space. Certainly they
Mm-hmm.
can be in the home. But again, when you have families that are together, sometimes that can be difficult.
I was
But
going to say, sometimes when you get all that family, they love each other, but running on top of each other can,
I know,
be a
I know,
little too
right?
much sometimes. Yeah.
Yeah. It's time for you to go home. Open the back door, walk to your
Open the back
place,
door,
right? There you go.
walk 20 feet back that way.
Yeah. I think it's a wonderful solution because it allows allows your parents to have their independence if that's what you chose to do. Is they said, yeah, I feel more comfortable. You're right there if I need you. You're a step away. I can check on you to make sure you're eating eating right
Yeah.
and have
No,
everything you
no.
need. And I think it's a great tool for considering how to take care of aging parents, as opposed to what the costs are for senior living, right? Senior living in the
Oh,
Bay Area, at least $6,000 a month on up, right? Six
I was
thousand
going to
tends
say
to be
that's
the starting.
probably minimal from prices I've seen. $6,000 a month is sort of like, hi, this is your basic.
Exactly.
It's like,
It's not the Four Seasons, right? It's a
no.
basic room. But it starts at 6,000 a month. And I imagine if you put the numbers together of what it costs to build the ADU, you'll see that it's much more cost effective and it has some advantages of being right there next to your family.
No, it's nice too. And, we went through a period of time where we had aging parents
Mhm.
and they weren't right next door. And you did wonder, how are they on top of their medication? Do they are they doing the things they need to be doing in terms of any rehab that they needed to be taken care of? It was not easy to check in on them. You could call them,
Mhm.
but you couldn't just go out back, as it were, in this scenario, and say, "Hey, mom, how is everything? How are your meds? Are you doing okay? Have you eaten today?"
Right.
And just sort of be there in a very personal kind of way for them. Yeah.
Absolutely. I just think that I think you're starting to see more and more of these in the Bay Area. And so really I have in different counties, especially here in the Bay Area, there are a lot of incentives because there's such a housing shortage to
Oh,
do
really?
that, right? So it does make a lot of sense to at least go down the path and see if it makes sense for you. And I think as you see more of these ADUs in people's primary residences, you have this really multi-generational housing
Hmm.
property. It can bring value to properties, of course, right? It brings
Yeah.
value because you're actually putting a separate structure on the property. There's always different laws and things are happening these days, but there's even talks of being able to split lots and do all sorts of things. But it's certainly worth going down that road for discovery. Yeah.
No. And nothing ventured, nothing gained, educating yourself, finding out what the rules and regs are, as it were, in terms of your particular area and what
Mhm.
your city or your town will allow you to do
Mhm.
is a good exercise so that and it may be far less of an obstacle than you think it is. That's what's sort of fascinating me in the sense of, it sounds to me like some cities and towns are maybe a little more giving in terms of if they understand it's for senior units.
Yeah, absolutely. I've seen it. I've seen some cities waive the permit fees, which could be anywhere from $5,000 to $15,000 just for the
Wow.
permits. It was very fascinating. I had a recent client that I met with, and they did the same. They thought about this process. They had lots of land, right? So they had a lot of land, so space wasn't an issue.
Hmm.
And what they ended up doing was they built the ADU in anticipation of their parents at some point coming to live next door to them,
Ah,
right?
okay.
But it turns out that mom didn't want to leave home. She wanted to stay put.
I'm
Wanted
not
her
going
own.
anywhere.
Yeah, she wanted her own independence. She was comfortable where she was. Her neighbors were
Yep.
across the street. And that makes sense sometimes. But what was fascinating is, okay, that plan A, the intention was there. Mom decided to stay where she was at. And so it was used in a different approach. It was used for a family member that was going through a job transition, right? And so I found a client that did this for their family member. They moved into the ADU, right? And then were able to get back on their feet and have a place to stay. So it was like transitional housing, right? And it was very
Ah,
fascinating because now you have another piece of property that's right there that can be used multiple ways. Can be used for family and maybe young, your children. It's so
yeah.
expensive to buy a house in the Bay Area. Why not stay there, right? That's a great opportunity, for them.
Oh no, I'm thinking about it when my kids had graduated college and
Mhm.
they were looking for work and they came back home to live for a time until they found a job and then they
Mhm.
could save money up and then, pay for all the things they needed to pay for in terms of getting an apartment to rent and lease.
Right.
It would have been more comfortable for them in many, many ways because they've been in college for 4 years. They're used to their independence. They're used to being able to come and go when they want without answering to mom and dad and whomever, and there's that property you could say, okay, great. We have this as an asset. This is something that you can use.
Yeah.
And if it takes you a year, fine. It's no skin off anybody's nose. I can imagine even charging them nominal rent just to get them used to the idea of being responsible.
You brought up a good point. I wanted to comment on that. They're so used to being independent and in their own space, but
Yeah,
so are you, right? As the parents that have
exactly.
somewhat an empty nest, you're thinking, well, how does our dynamic change if they come and live in the household, right? They're used to now being independent and coming back. It's like, whoa, it makes more sense. Here's the ADU. Here's the keys. Guess what? And guess what? we'll give you a family rate, right? Here's the family
Yes.
rate, right?
Yeah.
And maybe you collect the rent and put it in a savings account and say, okay, all that money you paid towards rent, here's towards your down payment. Whatever the
Yeah.
circumstance is. But again, nominal rent, a great way to effectively use, an ADU to address your own family and your young adult children that are just out of college, and you don't want to disrupt your daily routine, right? So
Yeah. And the other obvious thing here is, it is, whether it's from another family member or whether it's from a stranger, it is income. And increasingly, a lot of people are finding, yeah, I've got my Social Security, and yes, I've got my 401k, and yes, I'm going to be okay.
Mhm.
But as you know, everybody's nervous when they retire. Am I going to run out of money? And, this is a potential for creating a stream of income for you that's reliable, that's consistent, and, you can account for it, as it were.
Absolutely. I think it's great, and I love having this topic about using your assets more effectively. And I think
Yes.
that more people need to understand how an ADU can impact them, and I think that's great that we're discussing that today. Hopefully, the viewers find it useful.
Yeah. Do you have any, you've mentioned a couple of examples of clients that have used it. Has there been anybody where it was like it had a profound impact on them, where they were able to do things, or it empowered them in a way that they otherwise wouldn't have been?
Yeah, I mean, client that I had met a few years ago, this was the bridge to getting to be retired, because
Mm.
once that ADU was built, then they lived in an area which is in such demand because of its vicinity to, the big hospital, Stanford
Yep.
Hospital, that they're in such a great place that she was going to generate so much retirement income it exceeded her Social Security and her pension. And
Nice.
the nice thing is the ADUs are customizable. So it's so fascinating with ADUs because nowadays they have prefabricated ones that are basically,
Oh,
you pick
really?
what you want and they will build it off site. They will bring a crane in and they will build the foundation and drop it in your backyard, hook it
Wow.
all up, and it's done. So that's one. Another option is they call them stick built, and they will customize an ADU for you, right? So they can, they will build the foundation offsite, bring that in, and then customize the build. And
Yeah.
a lot of times, when in some communities they've got a lot of different regulations, like your house has to look like this, or the architecture of the neighborhood. So
Yeah.
you can
Homeowner
custom fit.
associations. Yeah.
Exactly. You can build the ADUs to be very similar to your house. So, you've got the same, tile roofing, and so it really kind of blends in. It doesn't stand out.
Oh,
So
that's
there's a
good.
lot of customization with ADUs. And so she built herself like a 2-bedroom, ADU, built it out the way she wanted it with appliances. It was probably nicer than her primary residence, but square footage wise, it wasn't as big. So, and she didn't use it anyway. So she was
Right.
able to generate, I want to say, about $6,000 a month in income. Right. And the
That's
cost,
amazing.
yeah, the cost of the ADU is maybe $1,500, and it is what it costs monthly. So, she made about $4,500 net positive cash flow. You put that on top of Social Security, you don't have stock market risk. It's another way to best utilize the asset. So, yeah, I would encourage anybody to, if they're thinking about retirement and all these things are happening in their lives, I would really encourage them to consider, walking down the path to see if it makes sense for them.
Yeah, it does. It makes sense. And you were telling that story, and I thought, in addition to that, it creates income where, depending on what her circumstances were, she could go visit her family. She now has money to travel, not and go see where her family members, where they are, as opposed to, being stuck at home and having to come see her in that sort of scenario. So it's good. So Mark, if people are interested in doing this kind of thing, exploring this kind of opportunity, are there resources they should check out, or should they check in with you, and can you help them walk through some of this stuff?
So I certainly can help clients kind of walk through the scenarios and the possibilities, right? A lot of the times it will require some financing or utilization of cash to
Yep.
put the ADU in place. A typical 400 square foot ADU can range anywhere. You'd be surprised, anywhere from about 200,000 upwards of 7 or 8, depending on how nice you want it and the square footage
Sure.
and the amenities. So certainly the finance part of it comes in, and certainly from a financial planning standpoint, we need to make sure that the numbers kind of pencil out and make sense. But again, you want to talk to ADU builders, potentially lenders if you need to get financing, or your advisors to look at, well, maybe some of this money I have in cash could be used to build the ADU. So I'm certainly happy to have discussions with clients regarding that.
Yeah, and as always, before you get too far down this road, check to see what the regulations are in your community, right?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Yeah, because it could be that there's some places where they're like, no, we're not having any of that.
Right. I think they'll change their tune, right? When they see how it really impacts families, and it's
Yeah.
revenue it's revenue for them as well, right? For the counties, and
Yep.
tax revenue. So anyways. Yeah.
No, I know. I completely agree. So if anybody who's listening to this conversation between us wants to explore this further with you, or maybe just explore perhaps having a relationship with you, what is the best way for them to get a hold of you, Mark?
Well, my contact's in the show notes, and what I recommend is we always will have a link there where you can schedule a Zoom call or a phone call, or come in if you'd like, and we'll have a conversation about it.
That's good. That's good. And if you don't know Mark and you're listening to this podcast for the first time, I can assure you, yeah, he's as nice a guy in real life as he seems to be in the podcast, number one. And number two, the other thing you could do is just do yourself a favor, reach out and hit the follow button, because you'll become a subscriber, and that way you won't miss another episode of this fine podcast. You'll be notified, and you can give it a listen and see if there are some more ideas that pique your interest and entertain you further. So until next time, I'm Bill Tucker, thanking you for taking the time to listen to this episode of Beyond the Dollar Signs. And on behalf of Mark and everybody at 360 Advisors, thank you. We'll catch you next time. Thank you for listening to Beyond the Dollar Signs Financial Clarity. Click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit our website at advisors360pwm.com or give us a call at 408-778-8280. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Advisors 360. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions that you may have regarding your investment planning. ECA does not provide tax or legal advice. Guest opinions are their own. It may not reflect those of ECA. The viewer is encouraged to seek their own individualized tax and legal advice from a qualified professional.